Now we've created all these wonderful colors. We can also shift and move them in so many more ways. In this lesson, I'll show you how to create lighter, brighter, darker, and duller versions of any color. We can find the right hues, or colors, by mixing the biased primaries. Now we'll focus on values, lightness and darkness, with a new twist to the mixing. Here I have a blue. It's just our color wheel blue, the violet blue. I can make it lighter, brighter, darker, or duller, just by what I choose to add. So let me walk you through how that works. To make a tint, or a lighter version of the blue, I've added white. The blue would be lighter if I just used the lightness of the paper as a white, but I get a creamy, soft white by adding some white pencil. I'll show you how in just a minute. If I want my blue to be brighter, I'm going to add a little bit of analogous color. In this case, I just chose the other color wheel blue and brightened up my blue. To darken my blue, I have to look somewhere else on the color wheel. I could go directly across from blue to orange, the complement, but that's going to do something different than I want. I'm going to bring in the complement in a sneaky way. I have a violet blue with a violet component. I'm going to bring in a dark green blue. It's indigo. The green in the indigo carries in some yellow, which is the complement of the violet in the violet blue. When I add indigo to violet blue, I get a much darker version. It's sort of a midnight blue that I get from that. If I want to dull down my blue, though, I now do need to reach across the color wheel. If I go directly from blue to orange, I'm going to get a very muddy color. So I'm going to use a neutralized orange. You probably know that color as brown. Brown is orange with a little bit of blue already baked in. When I add a brown to my blue, it dulls down the blue. I'm counting on the complement to do that work. Looking at the yellow, I've started with the orange yellow from the color wheel. I've made a tint by adding white. I've made it brighter by adding my other yellow from the color wheel. And now I want to darken the yellow. It's tempting just to add more yellow, but that won't quite do it. I decided on a violet red. It brings in a little bit of the violet that's the complement to the yellow, but it's got a little bit of the red that will support the yellow. So I just get a darker version of yellow. If I want to really dull that yellow down, I'm going to go directly across the color wheel to violet. But my yellow is a pretty light color, so I'll use a light violet to just dull it without darkening. Once you get in the habit of working with a color, you'll see that you can get so much more out of a single color. Let me show you how it works with this red. I started with our orange red from the color wheel. If I want to make a tint, I'll bring in a white. Now here's the trick. I'm going to lay down white first. You can't really see it going onto white paper, but you'll feel it, and you have to work on faith. I am creating a nice little buffer for my color. Let me show you what would happen if I made a tint just by using my pencil with a very light pressure. It kind of works, but it looks really grainy. When I lay down the white first, and with a sharp pencil and a light touch, I will get a creamy version of a tint. I'm always recording my recipes, so I'll make a note of the second color I used. I'm going back with my white, and you'll really feel it smooth the red and white together that were already there. So I've sandwiched the color between two layers of white, and I want to make a notation of what I did. I had 2 layers of white, 1 layer of red. It's nice to use this dot system because it doesn't take much time, and if you remember to do it, you'll always know what your recipe was. If I want to brighten my red, I'm going to need a different kind of red. Remember, analogous colors are near neighbors on the color wheel, so I'm going to use my violet red in addition to the orange red. I'll add one layer of violet red, make a note of what I used, another layer of the orange red, and one more layer of the violet red. My red will brighten up because I'm using two different versions of the same color. If I want to darken that red, I want to bring in that component complement, the complement that's hidden in some other color. The one I'm going to choose for this is violet. Now, that doesn't quite seem right with orange red, that I wouldn't go across to blue, but I'll get a very dull version of my color if I do that. The violet carries in some of that blue, and it carries the red to support my red. When I add a little bit of violet, and then go back to my red, I'm going to darken it. It doesn't take much to get a darker version of the color that you want. Again, I'll make a note. I used 2 layers of red and just 1 of the violet. Well, what if I want to dull that red down? This red is pretty bold, and if I want a duller version, I'll reach right across the color wheel to my green. That direct complement will actually start this mix on the way to a brown. It's the blue in the green working with the orange in the red, and the green working with the red. It's like a double complement. So I'll get a duller version of my color. The amount of complement I introduce to my color will determine how dull the mixture becomes. So I always have control. Now there's another aspect to color that we need to talk about, and that's saturation compared with darkness. Here you can see a light application of this orange color. Another layer makes it a little bit bolder. Another layer is bolder yet. And I'm all the way up to 5 layers when I have full saturation. Saturation is the depth of a color rather than the darkness. It can be really confusing when you're trying to make a shadow and thinking if I just add more color, I'll get a shadow, when what you really get is intensity or saturation. But there's a great way to add other colors to create darkness. So going from light to dark, I start with my 1 layer of orange. My next layer adds an analogous color, an orange red. In the next layer, I've added 2 analogous colors, with my third one leaning toward the complement, bringing in a little bit of blue in a violet red. I've pushed it a little further with a different violet red, and then to make a dark color, I actually have to go all the way to the complement. And I've added a little bit of violet to the mix. You can see the difference. We start out the same way, but we're going light to dark here, and we're going light to bright here. Let me show you how that works with our red. I'll start with just a light layer of our orange red. Just 1 layer. For our next stage, I want to go a little bit darker. So let's look back at the color wheel. I'm using orange red. If I add a little violet red, I'll start bringing in a little bit more depth. So 1 layer of orange red, followed by 1 layer of violet red. Darkens that color just a little bit. As I move darker, I'm going to pull in some other colors that will help me get toward my darkest red. I'll start with the 2 I've already used. Oh, don't forget to make your notes. And then I'm going to look to the color wheel. I've moved from orange red to violet red. I'm going to bring in a more violet red. I have this fuchsia color that will darken this just a little, bringing in a little bit more violet. So each time I'm building that same sequence and then adding something to it. I have orange red, violet red, the pink, which is a more violet red, and I'm actually going to reach into the violet. I'll start with a light violet, which will give me just a little more darkness. Let's make a note of all of these colors. Now they're really adding up. So let's make that stack again, and we'll top it off with our darkest color. I have orange red, violet red, pink, which is more violet red. As you can see, I'm moving more toward violet here, accessing the complement without directly complementing my mix. As you can see, I'm working toward blue, which would be a direct complement, but I'm never quite going to go there. To top off this darker color, I'm going to use violet, which brings in even more of the blue. And now I have a nice progression from light to dark of the same color. It's always interesting to see that 5 colors could go into a mix, and we still don't get any mud. It's just a matter of understanding the color wheel and knowing what you're reaching for. Now you're in control of the colors. You can mix the color you want, temper the hue to be the exact look that will help you most. Let's take all this new information and see how it plays out in a variety of drawing projects. In the next lesson, we'll start drawing our first project, a pear.